Hey guys, Omerko here, self-taught web developer. In today's video we will create a JavaScript project called Stepper. We will use this stepper kinda to register a user with its data. So the user could input different data, and by steps he will move from one chunk of data to the next chunk of data. First of all, if I click next now, you will see that validation here as the user didn't put any data inside. So as an example, I will put my name here and my last name here and go next. At that point, I move to the next step. My first step is now green as everything was valid and successfully inputted. Now I could put my email and phone number. So here I will write test@gmail.com, and for my phone number I will just put some dummy data and click next. So now we are at the third step and we could put our username and password. So for the username I could put test, and for the password I could put some dummy data also. And now if I submit, my data will be fully submitted and kinda the register form will just reset itself. So hopefully this won't take a lot of time. We will just create a simple markup for this, style it a bit, and well, the main part is a JavaScript for this stepper feature. So now let's immediately jump into code and create our JavaScript stepper feature. So as usual, we are starting with the empty project. So I will create a new file here and create index.html file for our markup. I will create the starting markup for my HTML5, and I will just change the title to say JavaScript stepper feature, for example. And what we wish to have here, well, we will have a form HTML tag, and inside we will have different steps, buttons that we will use for next and previous step, and also those indicators, those kind of circles at the bottom to indicate on which step we are currently on. So to create that form, I will put form comment, and I will create form tag. Form. Yeah, we don't need any action here. I will just add the ID of register form, and I will put the end comment here, end of form. So as I mentioned, let's first put the register title. Okay, so first of all we will create our steps. So each step will be its own div, and first of all we will have the title for that step, kinda the text for the step. This will be the name of the user. Name of the user will contain two input fields. So input, and it will be the type of text. It will have a placeholder of first name, and the name for it will be fname. Then I will copy this input field, paste it down below. The second one will be last name, and L name for my name for the input field. I will copy this step, paste it twice, and the second step will contain contact info, which will include the email. So the placeholder will be email. I will also change the type to say email, name email. Placeholder for the next one will be phone number. The type is okay, and the name will be just phone. And the third step will be login info, which will include username. So username, let me put the capitalized first letter, name also username, and it will be the second password. The second input will be password. So type will be set to a password, name also to a password, and the placeholder password with capitalized P. At this point we have all of our steps as a markup. Next, let's create buttons. So buttons, and I will have a div which will kind of just wrap my buttons. I will put button, which will kind of be type of a button, and also ID will be previous btn, and also I will just put previous text here. I will copy once again this button. The next one will be next button, so next btn, and the next text. I will put comment of end of buttons, and as the div of buttons will hold basically buttons class, so we could easily target it later in CSS. After our buttons we will have indicators, so indicators comment and indicators class that will wrap our indicators. So my indicator will be span element with class of indicator, and that is it basically. As I will have 3 of steps, I should have 3 indicators also. Let me put end of indicators here, and that is good. Now at this point in my browser for current project I just have that title of register, and I have my elements with input fields and buttons also. So let's jump a bit into CSS and style those a bit. Talking about CSS, I should first create styles.css file, and I should import it here at the head of my HTML. So master styles, it will be imported by a link tag, so link, and href will be /styles.css. First thing that I will style here will be the base of my project. So base will contain, I will put first this star sign, which will target each of my elements. I will put box sizing to border box for easier alignment. Then body will be, well, body will have different font family, which will be Segue UI, and I will also target my H1 to put text align in center. After this I could style my form a bit, so form, I will target my form with the ID of register form, and what I wish to have here, I will change the background color of the form to be hex of 564 CAF. Next thing, I will put margin of my form to be 100 pixel for top and bottom, and auto on left and right, which will put it in a center. Talking about the center, I will put my form to be 70% in width, so basically my form won't be spread fully through the viewport, through my browser viewport. Then padding inside the form will be 40 pixel for all sides, and minimal width I will set it to be 300 pixels, so we kind of have that responsive a bit. And I could change also the color, which will be FFF, which stands for the white color. Next one, we should style our input fields. So those inputs I will target by input tag in HTML. I will put a bit of padding to 10 pixel for all sides. I will display those as block, as those should be in one line. Then width of those should be 100% just to take that full line, to take that fully width of my register form. And then next part, font size will be 18 pixel, and margin 10 to top and bottom, and 0 to left and right, so kinda the input fields won't be stacked together, they will be kinda divided by that 10 pixel. I will also again target my input and the input with the class of invalid. This invalid class will be passed through JavaScript later. If the input field doesn't contain any value inside, at that point it will hold the invalid class, and that input field that holds invalid class should have the border color set to red. The reason for this, we will kind of just show this as an error at that point. Next thing, we should work on our steps. So for my steps, I will just target my step class and I will display those as a none, and that is it. So at the beginning I don't wish to see any steps. I truly wish just to go through my JavaScript code, and based on a JavaScript I will render exact step that should be rendered on a screen. so the CSS and HTML won't handle this. Next elements that we have are our buttons. So buttons. So here I will target my buttons class and I will float those to right side, or I could put text align to a right, text align right, and each button that I have on a screen will contain background color of 1E, 8E, E9. Then color inside of the button will be the white color. Border will be set to none. I will also have a padding to 10 pixel, 20 pixel, and font size will be same as for the input fields, 18 pixel. Cursor will be pointer, so we will have that call to action, and margin left for each button will be 15 pixel. Now I could work with my button hover, and I wish on hover to set the opacity of the button to 0.8. So basically I will have at least that simple hover animation. And finally I will target my previous button by prev btn id, and I will change background color to that to BBB. So basically my previous button will be kinda grayish, and my next button will be the blue button at this point. And finally we have our indicators. So for my indicators, I will first target my indicators, the whole div, and I will put text align to center, and also margin top 70 pixels, so we could move it a bit from the buttons themselves. And each indicator now inside, so indicator class, will have a height of 15 pixel, width of 15 pixel. We are kinda now trying to create those circles at the bottom that will stay. Margin at the, margin in overall could be 0 for top and bottom and 2 pixel left and right. Background color will be BBB, the same as the background color of my previous button. Border will be set to a none. Then we will have border radius at this point, which will be 50% to create these indicators as circles. Then next thing, I will also display those as inline blocks, so they will be next to each other, and opacity will be 0.5, and that is good. Now I will have active class on my indicator. So indicator.active, if the indicator holds the active class, that means that we are currently on that step. At that point I will put the opacity to 1, so kinda we could see that fully, that we are kinda currently on that step. And also my indicator will have the class of finish or finished, whatever, and it will be the background color of 4D E9 1E, which is kinda light green, which will put the light green color on my indicator if that step is fully finished. So now in my browser what we could see, well, we don't see a lot. We have that big purple section, which is our form. We have a register title. We have previous and next buttons, and also those indicators at the bottom. We don't see at all our input fields because we hided our steps currently. So now we will also create the JavaScript functionality itself, and through that JavaScript we will handle those input fields. We will basically dynamically set current step. We will also handle current indicator that should be active, and also all the classes for active, invalid and finish. And also we will run events on previous and next to move between our steps, so to go to previous step or to a next step if the form is valid, if those input fields are valid. So at this point on, it is good to create our JavaScript file and work with our functionality. So I will create here stepper.js, and I will import it at the bottom of my body. So stepper comment and script with source, which will lead to my stepper.js file. So first of all here, I wish to grab all of my elements from my HTML that I will use through JavaScript here. So let's start with my form. So I will put elements comment here, const of form, which will be equal to document dot query selector, and I will select here ID of register form. That is good. Then I will have const of steps. I wish to get all of my steps. I will get those by document dot query selector all at this point, and I will pass here step class. So, and at this point I will get all of my steps that I have here in my HTML, and they will be returned to me as a node value, which I will be later possible to kinda loop through those. So next thing, I will use const of indicators, and it will be document dot query selector all again, and I will pass here indicator class. So I will get all of my indicators here. Then also I will have my buttons. So next btn will be equal to document dot query selector, and here I will pass hash for the ID and the next btn. Then I will have const of previous btn, which will be equal to document dot query selector, and prev btn is the ID for my previous button. And at this point we should have all of our elements from HTML passed to our JavaScript. So the next thing, I wish to set my first step. So let current step will be equal to 0. So this current step will be equal to 0. The reason for that is basically we will count our steps from 0. So this will be 0, 1, and 2. So we will start our steps, our stepper feature at the first step, which is 0 step. And now we could start moving, so moving through steps. So here, to create the movement method, I will create const of move, which will be equal to the function to an arrow function. My move will get some data here. That data will be step itself, or I could put the n as it will hold the number at the end, as my step is basically a number 0, 1, or 2. So this method will move me from step to step. First of all, what I should do here is I will stop movement if form is not valid. So I should stop here my movement. To do that, I will create the if condition here, and I will set that if n, if that step that is passed is equal to a 1, so basically if the n is number 1, and validate form. So I will create validate form method here. So if the n is equal to a 1 and validate form is not valid, I will soon create this validate form method which will return to us boolean value of true or false. So if the validate form is false and the n is set to a 1, I will just return here, and that is it. I will just kind of return, or I could pass here return false, which will again work. So I will just stop my code from running, so move method won't move at all. So talking about this validate form, let's create it right now. So after my move, I will create comment of validation for form, and I will create here const of validate form, which will be equal to a function, an arrow function, and here I wish to validate my form. First of all, I will have some initial values. I will have my input fields. So for the input fields, how will I get my input fields? I will get my input fields, let me put the comment of set initial data, and I will get my input fields, so let inputs to be equal. So basically, if I am currently on my step 1, I wish just to get the input fields from that step 1, these two input fields. I don't wish to validate input fields for the contact info or login info. I just wish to validate fields for a name itself. So here, to get that current input fields, I will use my steps, and I will loop through steps of the current step. So if the current step basically is set to a 0, then I will get these two input fields. if the current step is set to a 1, then I will get these two input fields. And this current step will be set to the step that we are working on currently. So if I wish to get the input fields from it, I will use query selector all on it, and I will pass here input HTML element. So I will get all the input fields from the step that I'm currently on. Also here, I wish to have let valid flag, well, let valid just set to true, and here I will return this valid flag at the end to set my validation form to be valid or invalid. So let's now check if any of our input fields is empty. So here, check if any of inputs is empty. So how we could check that? We could use here for loop or for each loop, whatever. I will go with the basic for loop. I will set my index to be 0, and here, as long as my index is less than my input fields, that length, I will loop through it, so I++. So now, what I truly wish to check here is if my inputs that I just set here, so inputs of the current index, so I'm looping through first and second input, if those inputs kinda holds the value, so that value is equal to an empty string. If that's the case, basically I wish to set my validation to false. So if there is any of those empty, my form is not valid, so I shouldn't move to the next step. So here I will set my inputs of that index, current input. Class name will be set, well, not be equal, but plus equal to invalid. So basically, sorry, I mistyped, invalid. So basically I will add invalid class on that input, and as you know, in my CSS that invalid class will add the border red to that input field. And also here I should put the valid equal to false. At this point my validation is not correct, and if everything is okay, we should continue our movement. So if everything is okay, continue with movement. So here I will check if valid, if the form is valid. At that point I will put the indicators also of the current step, that class name, to hold the class finish. So basically my indicators now will have indicator and finish class, and this finish class will add that green color to them. So now as we handled our CSS, we could just return valid here. So basically if the validation form is true, then the code will skip this line of code and the movement will continue. If the validation form is false, then it will stop here and the code after this won't be run at all. Talking about the code after this, we should basically remove current step and pass value for next one. So if everything is okay, then we should remove the current step as we won't see it anymore, and we will pass the value to the next one, to the next step, and kinda the next step will be the next two input fields that we will have. So steps here of the current step, that style, that display will be set to none, and I obviously mistyped. So current step that style, that is okay, and now we are hiding our current step here. Also I will change my current step here, so current step will be equal to current step plus n. N will be the number passed later, so we could pass here, if the current step is 0 plus 1, the next step will be 1, so we will move us to the next step. So now we should also handle the validation of submitting our form here. So maybe we are currently on the last step, and instead of moving to the next step, we should instead submit the form. So here I will put submit form and stop register if submit button is clicked. So here what we should do is if current step is bigger or equal to steps dot length, which will mean that we are on the last step, at that point we will run form, which we got here at the top, and on that form we have submit method that we could use to kind of submit the form, and at that point we could here return false, or just return to stop code after this from running. If we are not on a current step and we should still continue with movement, then we should show the next step. And for that I won't create the functionality here, but I will kind of divide my code a bit and create the method of show step. So comment of show next step, I will create the method later. It will be show step, which will get current step value. And now let's create this show step. To create my show step, I will go after my validate form method, and here I will set show exact step that we should show. So const of show step will be equal to the function which will get that current step, which is the n, and inside we should do something. Let's first immediately show next step here. So show next step. So to do that I will use steps, loop through those with the n itself, that current step, and style for that one will be, well, the display for that one will be set to block now. So this step will be visible at the screen. And also now I should also update the buttons. So update buttons based on changes. What does this mean? Well, basically, if we are on a first step, we don't wish to see that previous button because we won't have the step that is coming before the first one. And also if we are on the last step, instead of clicking on the next button, we should have the submit button instead. So here I will use something like if n is equal to 0. So if we are on the first step, then previous btn dot style dot display will be set to none. So we don't wish to see previous button, but else we will set to block. And also one more thing, if n is equal, and here in parentheses steps.length -1, then at that point, basically if we are on the last step, then our next btn dot style dot display not display, sorry, and not style, the next btn inner HTML I wish to change will be set to submit. And let me copy this, and else it will be set to next. So basically, if we are on the last step, then our next button will hold the text of submit. Instead of that, on all of the rest steps, it will hold the text of next. And now we also changed our buttons. And lastly, we need to kinda change our, well, indicators. So for that, in my show step, I will update indicators. Let me create step indicator method where I will pass also my current step with the n value. So to create that method, I will at the bottom here use let me put the comment of set step indicator and use const of step indicator, which will be a method which will get the current step with the n value. And here, first of all, I wish to remove active indicator styling. So remove active indicator styling. So for I will loop through this with the for loop. I will loop as long as my index is less. So basically index will be null, but I will loop as long as my index is less than my indicators dot length. So I'm looping through my indicators. And here I will loop through those. So I will check if my indicators, current one, which I'm working on, dot class name. So basically I will change those. So here what I wish to do is class name will be set to indicators, again the same one, class name, and here I will use replace. Replace will hold two values. First value is the value that I wish to replace, which will be active class, and the second value will be the value that I wish to pass, which will be just empty string. And after this I will show active indicator. To do that I will use indicators and n1, the current one, that class name, and I will plus equal my active class here. So what does this mean? I will loop through my indicators, and for all of those I will remove active class if there is any of those that holds the active class. But also for the current one, basically if I'm moving from the 0 step to the first step, then my first step, the current step, will hold the active class instead. And that is it basically. There is few things that we are left to do here. We should show first step here. So to show first step is just show step, and I will pass current step here, which is initially a 0. And that is it basically. We will get our first step here. But still we cannot move through our steps because we are not running our move method anywhere. To do that, I will do that immediately on my index.html. So on my previous button I will use on click method, which will run move, and to move to a previous I will use -1 as a current step here, as a step itself. And then again on click, for the next one I will again use move method, and I will use 1 in positive value for the next step. So now we could start testing our register form. I have my first step here, which is good. I don't see my previous button, which is again good because I don't have a previous step, and I have my first indicator as the active one, which is again good. If I click next, then I have my red border around, which is the error itself, which is good. If I populate the value here, so with my value, and use next now, I will be moved to the next step, which is great, but I have problems with my previous button, which is probably set to a block, and it's moved obviously to the left side. I cannot text align it now, so maybe I should use float to the right side here. No, never mind, let's continue just quickly. So if I go previous here, that works with my data here, but the border red is around. Never mind, we could clean that up, or we don't even need to do that. The functionality is here. So we have our finished first step. Let me use the email here. So test@gmail, phone number, like this. Go next, and now we are at our third step, the last step, and now next button doesn't have a next text but submit. So here I could use test user and password, just test and submit, and that is it. Our form is resetted, and at the top you can see our fields kinda that are ready to be submitted. So now the things that we could clean up is this buttons section, where it is. Here it is, we have text align on the right. We could remove these buttons, and on a button instead I will add the float to the right side. If I'm adding the float to right side, that means that my previous button will come after the next button, so I will just turn those around, so those will be in the right spots. And for the stepper now, we could clean that invalid class on my validation. So what I could do here is use else here and use my inputs I of class name to be equal to inputs I of class name dot replace, and I will replace the invalid with the empty string. That should do the work. And now if we test this again, use some name, last name, go to a next one. If I click again on next, I cannot move. There is a red border here. So here to enter email, now to enter phone number. So the border is still red, click next. And now if I go to previous one, we don't have that red border because there is no error anymore here, and the next value and the previous button is also at the right spot, so the whole feature is fully finished. If I put some username at the end and password for it, submit, there it is, everything is okay. So at this point our data is ready to be submitted to the backend side, to the database, or to some service that you might use here. But yes, this is it. Thank you for coming and watching through this video. I hope that you liked it and that you learned something new. If you did, please click like and subscribe as I'm posting new content weekly. Thank you and see you in the next video.